This is Geek Gab with your hosts, John and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back, Geek Gab, for Saturday, June 30th, 2018. And the only thing I can think of when I hear 2018 is that we are steadily moving forward to the time when Blade Runner will be actual news. I cannot wait to see all the off-world colonies and human androids and everything from Blade Runner. Does that excite you?
I can't wait, to be honest. I'm going to get my very own replicant.
I want to get I was going to say one of the flying cars, but then I'm also caught on the massive gun he had that shot holes in walls and stuff. I'm kind of torn between those two.
Do I have to wait till 2049 to get the holographic girlfriend though?
Yeah, that seems like a step backwards in technology.
I'm pretty sure we're gonna have girlfriend robots well before we give flying cars and sentient androids.
Or free floating holograms. That's pretty far off, I would imagine. Before we jump into the absolutely awesome topic of the show that we have thoroughly planned out in advance, scripted almost. How's your week?
It's been really good. Actually, I wanted to talk about Origins a little bit because I missed last week and I didn't really give a report.
We had the live broadcast from the show. From the floor. I don't remember if that was last week though.
That was a couple weeks ago. Last weekend I was still asleep for my big trip.
Oh, that's right, because you were all jet lagged.
It was fun. But
I mean, you went to Europe. You went to Latvia,
India.
Estonia, Lithuania. One of those.
Yeah, I went to Estonia and then India and then came back.
It's sad that I can only remember the Baltic states as one unit. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. I can't pick out one of them.
That means that you're old.
Oh, that's right. 'Cause I was around when the Soviet Union was around.
Uh-huh.
I have literally gone to Checkpoint Charlie and the Berlin Wall, folks. I have gone through Eastern Germany when there was an Eastern Germany. Soviet soldiers inspecting our car, sticking a big mirror underneath it to make sure we weren't smuggling anyone in. It was a trip. So we're the last generation who will literally the last generation to remember when the Soviet Union was a going concern and not just something you see in alternate history TV shows.
Or in scary political ads these days. Because, the Russians.
Yes, Russian collusion.
Speaking of Russian bots, another thing happened to me this week is that through normal usage of Twitter at work, I was flagged for suspicious activity. I think Twitter thinks I'm a bot or something.
If you tweet out or retweet too many comments that are not way to the left, then they demand that you provide them with a phone number in order, and they say it's because, we think you're doing suspicious things, but really they demand that you provide it with a phone number so they can keep track of you, so that when the left-wing dictators grab power in the country, they have your name in a file and they're ready to send out all the stormtroopers into the streets of your hometown and grab you up, just like Red Dawn. Bring that back to the USSR.
Yeah, the text is, your account appears to have exhibited automated behavior that violates the Twitter rules. I don't know how clicking a couple of follows and clicking a couple of retweets over the course of an hour looks automated to anybody, but there you have it.
Oh, it's a lie. That's the third law, Daddy Warpig's third law of Twittering there. The third law is, of course, Twitter staff is corrupt, so abuse happens. Abuse does actually happen. The first law is that Twitter is so poorly programmed, is so buggy, that normal functionality looks like abuse or corruption. And the second law is Twitter is so badly designed that intended functionality is impossible to distinguish from malice. So, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I haven't had good and warm and fuzzy experiences on Twitter.
It's funny that it's pretty much what we have, because it's an unfortunate platform run by unfortunate people.
And yet it's really effective for certain things. It's more effective at reaching people that you wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise than any other social media platform, like Instagram or Google Plus or Facebook. Instagram, because it's all about pretty people taking pictures of themselves, taking fake pictures of themselves to make all their followers feel jealous. Then you have Facebook, which is it's about confusing the user as much as possible in order to hide how much you're giving information to the company to sell you to advertisers. And then, of course, Google Plus, which is all about die-hard geeks refusing to give up control of the one platform they've managed to get an iron grip on in this half of the first couple of decades of the century. And then there's Twitter, which used to have everybody on it, is extremely flat. That is, you can go from just you to major Hollywood stars in like a retweet or two. And it encouraged pithiness. It encouraged concision in your tweets. And so it had a lot of effectiveness that has been well exploited by certain anti-SJW movements and also right-wing people who are not left-wing, to spread information. And of course, that's got noticed, which brings the crackdown, which is probably what happened to your account.
Well, that's what I get for following and retweeting all those anti-Semites.
Yes, evil people. So
that's a joke, everybody.
It is a joke. It is a joke. Just for the sarcasm, I actually did this for the first time today on a tweet. I actually included a tag for the sarcasm impaired to let them know that this is just sarcasm. So they are out there, the sarcasm impaired people. A lot of them are good people. A lot of them show up especially in computer programming, playing video game fans, and role-playing game fans, tabletop role-playing fans. A large slice of those people are sarcasm impaired. So, it'd be nice if we could hire a woman to do sign language for the sarcasm impaired, or the equivalent of it, to translate for them. Did you see that tweet about the Eminem concert?
I saw that. I saw that. Someone was actually doing sign language for a rap show, which I didn't even realize that there was a demand for that. That's incredible. But she was jamming.
She was. It was absolutely incredible. I also did not realize that was a thing. I didn't know they hired people to do sign interpretation. And that's why I'm not being sexist, folks. I'm making a reference to this specific video. We need to have like the equivalent of her hanging around for the sarcasm impaired to translate into non-sarcastic language. So even though they won't, really fully get the joke, at least they'll understand the intended meaning.
Well, I don't know if we could afford her, but we should get someone to do sign language on the podcast so that people viewing it on YouTube can, the people who are impaired can view us on YouTube and hang out with us.
I will put that on the to-do list when we have the budget for it. Did you know we have an official budget now?
Do we?
We do. I have formed, because of some things, and I don't know exactly how much I can talk about. There was an issue that happened with some stuff of mine showing up in places where it wasn't supposed to be. And so I hired a lawyer. I got loans from a couple of people to pay for the lawyer. And then we spent some time discussing things with the people in question. And then there was a settlement. And because of that settlement, I got the money I needed to form an official corporation, a limited liability corporation, and also buy some new equipment, which was direly needed. My computer was, up until yesterday at about 4 p.m., was 7 years old. 7 years old.
Huh. Well, no, this is good. I'm glad to hear that you've got the budget and got you some new gear. You know what this means, right?
I do not.
No more technical difficulties on the Geek Gab.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
Yeah, we wish.
You heard it here. Hey, Wolfman at Large in the chat says that getting an interpreter is a good excuse to hire a hot chick in a chainmail bikini. Now, I think that's a little too distracting. That sends the wrong message. We want people to be able to view the hand signals and everything. I think the chainmail bikini's a little too distracting. We should probably just have her do it nude.
I do want to make a serious point, though. Something I had pounded home to me in the last couple of days with my new computer. So I formed an LLC. I paid back the loans I got, and it was just enough money left over for a new computer and a bunch of research material for the project I'm working on. Which progress is proceeding apace. Lots of things are being done. Great new and exciting things are happening, and they are just not in a form where I can talk about them in public yet. But every single day I'm doing work, I'm doing research, I'm doing brainstorming, I'm coming up with ideas, I am formulating long-term plans and short-term plans, I am creating characters and doing a whole bunch of stuff to get this ready. It is great and it's exciting, and I want to be able to talk about it. I just don't think it's the right time today. But when I bought my computer in 2011, I bought the top of the line computer that was available to me at the time. It's an Apple computer. It's a Macintosh. It's an iMac. I've been in computing for way too long. I don't even want to do the math to figure it out. I have worked officially for everybody in the online sphere. I worked for AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, the Microsoft Network, and probably a couple that I've forgotten here and there. Oh, eBay. I worked for eBay for a while. And I have gotten my the A+ certification for building your own PC. I was officially certified by Microsoft to know how to put together computer hardware and to lead other people how to put together computer hardware on the phone. So I'm not ignorant about computers. I choose to use Macs. I choose to use the Apple OS 10 because they do what I need it to do. My machine is a production machine. It used to be back in the 90s when I had a computer, I'd tinker with it all the time. I'd mess with it all the time because that was part of my hobby. That was part of my fun, is trying out different things and extensions that would change the look of the windows and whatnot. But ever since about 2000, my machine became a production machine where I stopped tinkering with it because I had so much work to do. I didn't have time. And so I just needed to sit there and do what I needed to do. And so I've been moving from computer to computer on the same project. This project officially began in the year 2000. And I have changed computers 4 or 5 times. And I keep on moving from computer to computer. So I've learned a lot about it. I thought in 2011, when I bought a top-of-the-line computer, it had the largest size hard drive, it had a solid-state drive in it, had the max amount of video RAM, max amount of RAM in the machine. In it, everything that you could do, it was literally top of the line. So and the reason why it was a smart idea, even though it was even though I could have gotten a similar computer for a lot less, is because after 7 years, it's still really good. It still worked. It's still fast enough to run almost everything I need it to. The only reason why I had to buy a new computer wasn't because the processor was too slow. It was because the computer itself is dying after 7 years of heavy use, For all of those years, it was in a very, very dusty environment. I had to have the computer taken into a service shop to get dust cleaned out of it 3 times. And it was in a very hot environment. And so it caused a lot of damage to the internals of the machine. And it finally just is giving out. It's on the very verge of collapse. So the new computer that I got, I did the exact same thing. I have got top of the line computer, the top of the line Mac, not the iMac Pro, but top of the line iMac. It's a 27-inch monitor. I technically have a 5K monitor. So
that's a lot of monitor.
It's designed. The monitor itself is designed so that people who need to edit 4K video have enough room on the screen for the 4K video and all the Chrome to do the editing with, all the controls and timelines and stuff. So I got a 5K monitor, and everything else is maxed out. The only thing I didn't have maxed out in the box when I ship it is RAM. If you buy from Apple, never, ever, 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 if you buy an iMac or an iMac Pro or a Mac Pro or a MacBook, whatever, don't ever buy more RAM than they ship with it, than the basic amount. Let it go. And then when you get the machine, take it to someone else who is qualified to stick RAM in there. Because the amount of RAM I'm going to put in this machine costs about $700.
Holy smokes.
But if I was buying that from Apple, it costs $1,400. So I saved $700. I'm getting 64 gigabytes of RAM in this machine.
That's fantastic.
It was awesome yesterday because I got this machine 5 days early. It got to me in the mail, physically, in a box, in the mail, 5 days early, which is fantastic. You're like, wow. But literally, one of my roommates was bringing it into the room, and I was looking at this box, and I was thinking in my mind is, what the hell are you doing with that? That's not for me. That's obviously for our other roommate who gets packages every day. And then, no, it was for me. Brand new computer, got to bust it out. But I am getting 64 gigabytes of RAM. I installed. So I got my new computer yesterday. I was all excited. I wanted to see, what 8 megabytes of video RAM would do, what the brand new hard drive would do. And I installed StarCraft 2 because I own it from Blizzard. And I went to it and I opened up the window to set all the graphics options because I wanted to see what I could do. And it pops up a little message that says, we have set the graphics settings in this game to the default recommended for your video card. And I'm like, great, that's awesome. I want to see what the default recommendations for my video card are. And I went down the list for everything in every single category. I tried to screenshot this. Unfortunately, Blizzard doesn't like that. They take over your keyboard, so you can't screenshot. You can't screenshot anything when their program is running. But every single option said ultra, 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 ultra. The default settings for this video card on this machine are the best you can get. Maxed out StarCraft. The only thing I saw that was turned off was something called indirect shadows. I don't know what that is. I don't know how much that would have otherwise enhanced my gaming experience, but I was just excited. I don't know that I've ever seen that on any game, on any machine I've ever owned. When you open it up, it says, oh yeah, you can do anything you want. Congratulations.
Horsepower is the best, man. I'm happy for you. Similar thing happened to me at work. It's not quite as exciting, but I have a work machine with similar horsepower, and I can build something that takes 2.5 hours on a normal user PC takes 30 minutes. It's the best, absolute best.
Like compiling or bug checking?
Yeah, compiling. Look, for those of you who may not remember, I work for Microsoft. I actually work at Skype, and they're one of the Skype products, the whole product, and it's not a dinky little client product. I mean, some giant back end shit. I can build the whole thing in 30 minutes. My own personal build. Yeah.
Um,
Horsepower is for real, man.
it is. And here's the thing I realized. I got the computer. It only has 8 GB of RAM in it. Only has 8 GB of RAM in it. I'm sorry. That's just not a statement that it would have made sense to me just about any time earlier in my life. But you notice now, because especially if you use a web browser with several tabs open, I typically have like 10. Okay, that's not true. I usually have 40 to 50 tabs open in my web browser.
What is wrong with you?
In this specific, using my specific computer yesterday and today, I have about 10 tabs open at any given time in my web browser, and each of those tabs is running in a complete instance of the rendering engine. And so it's like having 10 separate web browsers running at the same time. But you notice this when you're trying to switch between programs, when you're trying to launch programs or quit programs, that all of this raw power, all of this hardware runs super, super slow. I've got a 4.2 gigahertz Intel Core i7, and all of this power on my hard drive and my processor and my RAM is wasted because you're moving so much stuff in and out of memory. You're doing page in and page out. Sorry if if you're in the audience, you don't understand what that means, don't worry. Those of you technologically oriented, you know what that means. You're doing so many page in and page outs. You have a massive speed hit. And so the 64 gigabytes of RAM isn't a luxury. It's actually a necessity for the way I use and abuse my machine. And it made me realize that using it with just 8 gigabytes, exactly what I was buying for that $700 is I was buying maybe up to 7 more years of having a super zippy computer, even under insanely idiotic conditions that I use my computer on. So, in all seriousness, with the kinds of programs we're running, especially if you're running anything that has some kind of built-in browser, it eats up RAM very, very fast. And the best thing to do, once you've got a great processor and a zippy hard drive, the best thing to do is to make sure you have more than enough RAM for what you'll be doing so that your computer never has to hit the hard drive when it's switching programs. Because switching from one program to another on a zippy, super fast processor is actually slower than on my 7-year-old computer because I don't yet have enough RAM in this box yet. I will on Monday. I'm taking it on Monday, and I'm spending the $700 to get 64 gigabytes of RAM installed. And after that, I am absolutely certain I will be delighted with the speed.
I can't wait for your professionally edited videos for the Geek Gab channel with that rig.
Now, that said, all that out of the way. Now that we have the intro out of the way, 24 minutes into the show.
Hey! My week has been good. I've had a pretty good week actually. Came back from that big long vacation after Origins. Started playing D&D again. In fact, immediately queued up. I didn't even get to do laundry for an extra week after I got back because I immediately queued up all the RPGs and Gloomhaven games that I didn't play while I was abroad.
Now you had some things you wanted to talk about. You had I think 3 things you wanted to talk about.
There were some things. There are some things that we can talk about. Hey, this is the Geek Gab. They're geekly things.
Let's start off with the Origins.
With the Origins. Well, Origins, I don't have much more to say besides what you guys saw on the other show. The folks who do the Players Organization for Vampire the Eternal Struggle, they have their North American Championship, and they hold it at Origins every year. And the players get together beforehand and play more Vampire. So there's a local pub, great place called Fabian's in downtown Columbus. We get together every year, or I should say they get together every year. I've been there twice. And they play Vampire tournaments for the whole week leading up to Origins.
So
where
they're
we
not
play
getting
more.
enough gaming at Origins. They need to stock up on gaming beforehand.
Yeah, and you have to understand that a very small minority of the players attend Origins for Origins' sake. For most of us, it's simply a venue where we play the tournament. And so the hardcore people who are there to play nothing but Vampire will arrive on Sunday, and we will play a tournament on Sunday. We will play 2 tournaments on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Thursday we'll have a tournament at Origins, and then Friday's the championship. Day 1 of the championship, because one day isn't enough. We call it the Week of Nightmares.
I sense from that pause you were expecting me to make a comment, but I have none in my mind.
Most people laugh when they hear Week of Nightmares. Thanks for ruining it, DW.
I'm sure our awesome audience is laughing at that.
Yeah, Jeffro Johnson in the chat, thanks for joining us, Jeffro, mentions, makes a snide comment about Origins being a cesspool of sexual harassment. Yeah, it got a lot of bad press. A lot of bad press this year. The people who ran the show stepped in a big flaming bag of dog shit when they uninvited Larry Correa. That was such an unforced error, and they doubled down on it too. It's like typical social justice warriors. And then apparently there were complaints about sexual harassment amongst gamers at Origins, which is I don't know anything about it. I shouldn't say anything, but I am rolling my eyes over here at the whole situation. So Origins probably has to clean up its act a little bit to to be more welcoming to gamers and their guests.
I want to mention this, interrupting the discussion, because I think it's hilarious. I just found this out. You know, there's the Twitter account that's called the Mossad.
Never heard of it.
It's supposed to actually be literally the Mossad, Israel's intelligence service. And they've gone the Wendy's route with their social media.
Just trolling all day long?
Yes. Specifically, they pick a lot of, really mock-worthy figures in Palestine and Syria and stuff and make fun of them. But they just sent out a tweet telling people not to... They're sending out opinions about the current World Cup match in 9 or 10 different languages: Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, some kind of Eastern European, like Polish or Czechoslovakian or something, and also Klingon. The Mossad.
Klingon.
The Mossad tweets about the World Cup in Klingon.
And this is an official account. This isn't what's the word? Proxy account or a phony account.
It's not obviously a parody account. They haven't got a blue check. They haven't tried to get verified. And so it's like an unofficially official account. I don't want to say it really is the Mossad because I don't have any proof. I don't know. But they tweet like they were the Mossad, and if they're somebody in character, they're better at staying in character than Godfrey Elfwick was. I actually honestly suspect it really is the Mossad. But there's no proof. And and the reason why is because how many people could send out a string of tweets written in 10 foreign languages with about the World Cup with the intent of, and this is their capping tweet. They says the lesson is never have the football/soccer debate on our timeline again. They're trolling.
Wow.
Indonesian. It looks like there's Indonesian. I know they sent one out in Hebrew. Hindi. They sent one out in Hindi. How many people could afford to? If you're a kid, if you're an anon, and you're sending this out, how many people could afford to just sit there and write tweets up in 10 different languages?
I mean, that depends. Is it just a Google Translate job, or?
It does not seem to be so. Oh, they did hit Russian, Spanish.
Oh, Russian spy.
So yeah, it's hilarious.
Hey, speaking of the World Cup, they've been showing the daytime matches at work in the common room, and you know about a third of the building is down there watching it every day. It has been watching it all week, and I don't watch it. I can't stand soccer, but I did see this one great moment. There's this amazing slow mo of some commotion after a penalty kick. So the guy, not a penalty kick. It wasn't mano a mano. With the teams were lined up. Anyway, the guy gets a free kick on goal, and the goalie traps the ball. He lands on the ball, so he's on the ground over the ball, and um, one of the opponents was charging at the ball, so he's got all this momentum, and he basically stops and slows down, and ends up leaning over and gently touching the goalie on the back of the shoulder with his fingers, and the goalie freaks out. The goalie's like rolling on the ground, yelling, pointing at the guy, and everything. It was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. And I turned to my coworkers who were watching. I'm like, this is why I don't watch soccer, guys.
Awesome. I've seen things like that before. Okay, so was there anything else you wanted to say about Origins before I, crudely interrupted you?
No, it was what it was. I didn't see much of the show besides what I showed you guys. I was there for the vampire.
And what were the other two things you wanted to mention?
Well, there was one thing I wanted to mention. I started listening to some YouTube shows done by our comrade in Dice, RPG Pundit. He's an interesting fellow. I think.
Yeah.
I think you've talked about him before.
Because there was a big scandal in D&D while you were like recovering from jet lag.
Scandal schmandal. It looked like a little internet.
It's pathetic, isn't it?
He even tried to coin a hashtag out of it. And let's be honest, everybody's sick of the hashtag activism.
Gamergate was like World War II, right? It was absolutely vast. It stretched across the internet. It got made into TV shows. It is still having after effects. Years later, people are still refighting the war. They think it's still going on, right? World War II, massive, gargantuan, impacted, was huge. And then there's Comicsgate, which is like the Falkland Islands War, okay? Between Britain, the UK, and Argentina over one set of islands, and it involves literally like 5 ships on either side and some Harrier jets. Islands that have a couple of hundred people on them. Okay, so you go from World War II to the Falkland Islands in Comicsgate, and now we're down to D&D Gate, right? Which is like 2 5-year-old kids spitting at each other on the playground. I'm not saying this in terms of maturity or intelligence involved. I'm just saying this in terms of scale, right? In terms of the scale of the conflict. If Gamergate is World War II, then D&D Gate is 2 5-year-olds spitting at each other on the playground.
Yeah, and he's got this good beef with a lot of the people attempting to run the D&D or the RPG industry these days, and I think he makes a lot of good points about the idea of the D&D community. Uh, a lot of people are being introduced to D&D and role-playing games through shows now. YouTube and shows such as Critical Role, which is basically a bunch of voice actors hang around and play D&D. And it's not D&D, but a lot of a lot of people. Sorry, what I mean is the game they are playing is D&D. It's a version of D&D, but the show itself is not D&D. And people who enjoy the show aren't playing D&D. They're not really part of the D&D playing community. They're
just listening to the show because they like the show.
Yeah, it's for a lot of people, it's a fun and interesting show. Now,
it's like people who watch Let's Plays but never buy or play the video games.
Exactly.
I'm not criticizing you. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm not saying you're fake, whatever. I'm just saying there are people out there who literally watch Let's Plays but never don't own the game and never play it.
And somehow this is, I don't know, somehow this is controversial that he would say something like that. That he would say, you guys aren't really part of the community. You know, you're watching the show. That's all well and good, but you don't play D&D. That's somehow controversial. I don't know. Is it exclusionary to exclude people who aren't doing the thing that? I don't know. Yeah, it didn't really. But where it's going is he's actually been making some YouTube videos on his own, and the last couple he did, I think, were actually kind of really interesting. So he's got two things going. He's got a couple of his own videos, and he recently started a series called D&D: Things They Taught You Wrong on Purpose. And he hits the really he goes for the low hanging fruit in his first couple of videos. He talks about, in his first video, he talks about balance. The idea of encounter balance and interclass balance and that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that we've been, those of us who've been playing for a while, we've sort of been rolling our eyes at this ever since D&D 3rd edition, where they made an obvious attempt to make all the classes balanced, make everybody feel like they can all contribute in combat the same way and whatnot. So he spends about 15 minutes railing against that. And his second video is on character backstory, which is, of course, the worst. You've heard me rant about the same thing. In fact, he says the same exact things that I do. So that means that my conclusion is that he is a very experienced, learned, and astute dungeon master and commentator on it.
I hate to make this analogy, because this analogy is always made and it's always wrong. But I'm trying to make it a very precise way, a very exact technical way. I would use the term rogue, like roguelike, the rogue family of games, but that's really out of vogue. Not a lot of people who aren't already ancient know that. Or you, Moria, whatever. There is a certain style of playing D&D, which was the original style of playing D&D, from what I know. And it could best be described as Infinity Blade or Dark Souls, where you have this dungeon, you go in, characters die, you make new characters, and you go in and try it again. So if you're playing, and I don't mean this to use the phrase Dark Souls or Infinity Blade in a derogatory term. I'm not trying to put it down. I'm just saying this is a real style of D&D, and the original style of D&D. And so if you're set up to play that, where characters are, to a certain extent, fungible, where if they die, you just make another one and it doesn't matter, then a backstory is mostly useless. But there are lots of other genres of role-playing games where backstories may be critically important, like a superhero role-playing game or something. So in connection with D&D, if you're playing that, Dark Souls, Infinity Blade, roguelike style, then backstories just get in your way. because you're going to get attached to characters that are probably going to die as soon as you make one stupid mistake.
And RPG Pundit's argument is slightly different and interesting in my opinion. He says that the purpose is to have a virtual world, a world that all the characters can inhabit, and by focusing on the character's pre-written backstory and tailoring the campaign to that backstory, it destroys that realness of the world. It puts the characters at the center of that world instead of leaving the world as it is and allowing the characters to live in it.
I
Blew your mind.
I
Blew
can't
your mind.
I can't speak to his particular experience, but in my experience, that tends to not be the case. Maybe it's because of how I run my games.
Well, if I recall, you put a lot of work into the background of the world, and you incorporate character stories into that world whenever appropriate. You allow the players to add to your world. I think that's appropriate. But I think where players go wrong is that everybody nowadays is taught a version of D&D where it's all about the story, where new DMs are encouraged or are told, if you're not using your player's character's background as part of the story and making them all feel special and giving them all a moment to shine, you're DMing wrong. And that's the sort of thing that that pundits been trying to argue against.
There's a certain style of player who are very, very narcissistic. It's like they're not getting enough attention from their parents or from society or from whomever. And so they demand that the game be all about them. And it's like, well, dude, you know what? If you got 5 people at the table, the game isn't always going to be about you. You're not the most specialist person at the table. And your character isn't the most specialist character in existence.
I was speaking with someone at a board game group who's it was really delightful because it was an older woman, and she said, "Oh, I finally started playing D&D. I've never played it before." And I was like, "Oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about it." And then she says, "Oh, I've got this great elven druid," and she just starts going on about her character, and I just internally I just wall up and I go, "Oh God, of course she's learned that style of D&D. That's what she thinks is important." Nobody told her that nobody else at the table cares about your particular character.
Yeah, it just if you have
Bad.
this,
I'm glad she's having fun. Like, I'm glad she's having a lot of fun, and apparently the other people she's playing with is having fun. So, all the best.
if you have a super keenly neat backstory, great. That's great for you. But the game master doesn't have to pay attention to it. He doesn't have to focus on it all the time because there's a game going on.
Yeah. But that's not how I do things. It was a really nice and this'll be related. I played a bunch of D&D, including one of my players invited me to play in a game, and he's gonna do the Curse of Strahd, which is just a 5th edition port of the original Ravenloft adventure.
Okay, like I1 or whatever, or I9. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I9 or whatever it is. Jeffro probably will read it off the top of his head in a minute. It's a. But anyway, he started the game, and we all had fun and everything. We made characters and stuff, but there was no game there. It was an attempt at being a story. This thing happens, and every time we attempt to interact with the story, sorry, with the world, it turned out that there was some really important NPC that we had to interact with, and that sort of thing. And we spent about an hour before we got to the main town, Barovia, and then it became like a real actual game. Like we had a map of the town. Here's the entrance. The streets go left and right. Which way do you want to go? We actually started interacting with the game world meaningfully about an hour into the game, and afterwards, and he's a new DM, and afterwards the DM was asking for advice, and I had to say, look, any and all boredom felt at that table was 100% the result of scenario design. Like, you are running a 5th edition adventure. This is what it is. And I couldn't wait to get back to executing my own game, which was not as strict as a Gygaxian, adventure, and I am still using 5th edition as my system, sort of, but it was all about the game. Like, hey, you're in this spot right now. There you can only go, you can go left, right, straight. What do you do? In fact, they had to fight off a villain in the last session, but it just felt good to get back to that, actually playing a game as opposed to attempting to interact with some story.
By the way, it's i6. I've been looking this up, and if I remember correctly, the I series of modules were all. I haven't read this for a long time, so I better be quiet about it. I will misremember it, but anyways, it's i6, Ravenloft module.
And I do have a question.
Yes.
I have a question for you, but mostly for folks like Jeffro and RPG Pundit. We should have him on the show so I can ask him in person, and even Bradford, who writes a lot about this stuff. My interpretation of advanced Dungeons and Dragons, based on reading through the 1st edition player's handbook, especially the introduction, AD&D was made for the type of player that wants to have a character-centric game, a game in which their character doesn't die easily, that they can reach high levels and keep the same character from session to session, have a grand, winding adventure. And that is the game that was given a 2nd edition. It was extremely popular, and then TSR blew up, and then Wizards of the Coast picked that back up, and Wizards of the Coast continued in that vein. And people for decades now have been learning and playing that sort of D&D.
The difficulty with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and even White Box D&D and so forth, is that it grew out of a milieu where everybody running the games and buying the games knew each other and shared a large body of common assumptions that was just assumed, that they didn't even consciously recognize were assumptions, that were actually key parts of running the game. And that when they published it as a book and gave it to someone who'd never played D&D before, who didn't have those assumptions baked in, they did not know how to run the game in the same way that the pioneers who created it did. And I say that I'm not insulting them. It was a brand new phenomenon. They didn't know it was going to be as popular as it was. They were making these books and sending them out and seeing a lot of success. So no one really had the opportunity yet to understand that. It wasn't until competitors came along who needed to earn their way into an audience that they had to understand, okay, there are some core assumptions about how a game is being played, and we need to explicitly communicate that to players in the rulebook. And it wasn't even until the 90s, so 20 years later, 25 years later, that people began doing that. And even then, they didn't do it necessarily well, because they didn't know when they first published their games what those assumptions were. I'm thinking of Shadowrun 1st edition. Shadowrun 1st edition came out. Nobody knew what a Shadowrun game was. Nobody knew how to play a Shadowrun game. Even if you bought the book, you didn't know what a Shadowrun was supposed to be. And I assert that the people who published the game didn't know what a Shadowrun was supposed to entail until the very first module, which was DNA/DOA, came out. And then you got, okay, this is legwork. You do legwork, you get hired, you negotiate a fee, you do legwork, and then you go on a run, and then you deal with the after effects of that run. Okay, that's what a Shadowrun module is. Nobody knew that until DNA DOA was published, and until the other follow-up modules were published. And then they published second edition Shadowrun, which had all that in it explicitly from the beginning, because now people knew what Shadowrun was supposed to be. You needed something to show people what your game is supposed to be, and that's why introductory modules were a great thing for D&D if they're done right, because they can communicate to people what D&D was supposed to be. They didn't know they had to do that. They did not realize that when D&D became popular that they needed to teach people what D&D was supposed to be. So AD&D, if there were assumptions about what players should do, or whether or not first level characters should survive more frequently in an AD&D game than they tended to do in a Holmes game or in a white box game, those assumptions were likely implicit, and I doubt very much it formed an explicit goal in designing the game, because that just wasn't Gary's mindset. And again, I'm not trying to put him down. I'm not trying to criticize him. I'm just saying that wasn't a direction his mind had to go, because all the people he knew and all the people he played with already knew what D&D was supposed to be, and everybody else didn't necessarily know that.
Good point.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. It was more of a I wanted to help try and figure out how did we get to where we are, because that play style and the point I was coming to, that play style that D&D became, that's what D&D is now, guys. That D&D became, it's extremely popular.
We got to this point where the original style of play was lost, because when they designed AD&D and when they designed the 5-colored box D&D, which is the first version I really had a chance to play, basic, expert, companion, master, immortals, although really nobody really actually played much in companion or later. I know one campaign that actually ran all the way through up till the end of master. They were all 36 level by the end of the campaign. But the reason why it was lost is because they published 2 huge generations of games, AD&D and then basic BECMI, that left out how to play D&D, and people started playing D&D the way they thought fantasy should go, or the way the modules are written for it. Like Dragonlance. Oh man, Dragonlance was awful. I'm not saying the modules were bad, but the framing of Dragonlance as a whole was bad. Let me stick a pin in that for just a second. There was not an effort made to communicate how to properly play D&D to people who were just picking up D&D with AD&D in the stores, or just going into Walden Books and buying the red box, Dungeons and Dragons with big gold dragon on the cover, and with that cool module with all these where you first meet a bunch of different monsters. There wasn't an effort made to communicate how to play D&D in this style that had been up till now. What did I just... Oh, Dragonlance. Okay, here's Dragonlance. You want to talk about backstory ruining a game. I think Dragonlance... I think the modules themselves were awesome. Or at least several of the modules I've seen were really, really good modules by themselves. If you took them out of the Dragonlance universe, I think that first module, Dragonlance #1, could be a great module. It's a very traditional dungeon crawler once you get to the underground city. I think that part of it can make a great module. But the framework of the game, the setup where the game was, you were given pre-generated characters on cards. And your characters were high level. I may remember 5th level. They may be higher. I forget. And when you get together at the end of the last something or other, in the last home, in the last leaf, whatever, you read your backstory of what happened during the years since your adventuring group broke up. So you're given explicit characters who were explicitly part of an adventuring group years before, who broke up and are now coming back together again, and you're being given this backstory for them to read. And then, if you want to play your own character, you have nothing. They explicitly cut you all out of it. You don't get a chance to tell a cool story. You don't get a chance to make up your cool story. You don't get a chance to, take the place of one of these grand, glorious characters that they made and tell their story. Now, a lot of people have said that this module had a great big impact, and that's where people got addicted to backstories from. I don't know that was the case. I don't know that this module created that problem as much as this module sort of reflected it. That previous habit of playing, that previous style of playing had dropped off, and this is the new way that was kind of organically emerging, which is completely different from the old way. And then the game has sort of drifted ever since, because it's not under the control of a creator with a strong creative vision, right? It's under the control of successive generations of people, because there's no mission statement, because there's no this is what D&D is that people can point to. It just kind of meanders, and a lot of the concepts that are in the game, nobody really understands what they originally were, like lawful and chaotic, right? Nobody understands what lawful and chaotic were originally supposed to be and how they operated in, like, say, Keep on the Borderlands. By the way, I'm stealing a lot of this from Jeffro and other people, so I'm repeating their arguments, their positions. But they're accurate as far as I've seen. So D&D didn't have the play style explicitly communicated to new generations of players and DMs, and because of that, because there was no central explicit statement of a play style or even implicit statement of a play style, it just began to meander and mutate, and each new generation of people comes up with great new ideas that they borrow from other people, pulling it out of their butts sometimes, and tries to implement that in the game to make it better, and you get trash like 4th edition, which came from story gaming, which came from the Forge, which is absolutely the GNS theory, which was just abominable. It was a disaster, and every game designer who has tried to incorporate the GNS theory from the Forge has either made hyper-focused boutique games that are really, really restrictive, or they've made trash that's failed in the marketplace and people have hated it. And I'm glad to, it's past now. Very few people still remember it and hold to it. And even places where it was very strong, this GNS theory, gamer narrativist simulationist theory, like RPG.net, which basically bans you if you critique it, if you say it's wrong. Even those places have moved on from advocating for it. They're just now really pissed off, and they'll ban you for saying it's wrong. They've given up the fight. They just like to get their strikes in for revenge against people who don't like it. It wandered away because no one had bothered to set it down in paper explicitly, where everyone could read it and understand it and build towards that concept of D&D. There needed to be a statement at the beginning of the book. This is how you play the game. You have a dungeon. You go into the dungeon. You fight monsters. You outwit devious traps. If you get killed, you roll up a new character, or you take one of your hirelings and play them, and you overcome the dungeon. You go back, take care of things, and go back in and try again with your new character. That was not, and obviously there has to be more to it than that, but that's the core. That was not explicitly communicated, and as a result, D&D just mutated away from its roots.
Jeffro Johnson in the chat raises the same point that had just come to my mind. That basic D&D has a different type of system mastery. Basic D&D's system forces players to learn how to cooperate more and think laterally. And I realized that because I've been running my game for a couple of years now, and the characters have no reason to use hirelings. They've got no reason to work together with, NPCs or monsters or anything like that. They can pretty much do everything they want, and if they want to solve most problems with violence with combat, they're capable. 12th level sorcerers are not a big deal for them. They can handle it. It makes for a really strange game, and that's why I say that I maintain that 5th edition is a superheroes game.
I have played several times under the same GM who himself doesn't think laterally, and so you kind of get punished as a player for trying to come up with off-the-wall, oddball solutions that don't involve just straight up, I rolled a hit, I rolled damage, I rolled a hit, I rolled damage. And it's kind of frustrating because especially with, I don't know why, but even systems as disparate, as very different as we're playing 40K's Imperial Guard system. And in playing the new Star Wars system with the strange, funky dice that I hate that system and I hate those dice. Those are two extremely different systems, and yet in them the same problem comes up, which is as soon as you roll dice, you're going to lose. Because when you roll badly, you get punished for it, and bad stuff happens. And so what you want to do, and I'm not saying that's bad, I'm not saying they should change the design of the rules. I'm just saying what that makes you do is that you try as much as possible to arrange things so that you never have to roll dice, so that your victory can come with intelligently creating strategies, and you roll the dice as little as possible. Your ideal game is one in which you never had to roll the dice, because stupid, bad things happen when you roll the dice. And so if that's the system you're running, you have to be, as a game master, open to people trying to think of every cockamamie way they can come up with to avoid rolling dice, to just set things up where they don't have to roll dice. And when you have a player who comes up with an intelligent plan that needs GM education, that says, okay, yes, I think that can work. Okay, I think it doesn't work. Or even just, it's really straightforward, like, I want to go into town and find an inn. Well, you should be able to go into a moderate or small sized town and ask a normal person, hey, is there an inn here? And just get to go to the inn. You shouldn't have to roll streetwise checks or whatever mechanic your game has for that. You should just be able to do some things automatically because you're role-playing them. And if you're role-playing them and you come up with the right answer, you should get the success. You shouldn't be told, yes, you've done everything right, you've approached the situation perfectly, but now we're going to let the dice decide. That punishes people for rolling the dice. It punishes people for intelligent thinking and trying to reason your way through a situation. And that's absolutely not what game masters should do. Players who engage with the world as a world, who look at the details of the world they're in and try to think up ways to use what's in the world to accomplish their goals and get the right answer, should be rewarded for it, not forced to do the exact same thing that the drooling moron on the other end of the table, who isn't even really paying attention, he's just rolling dice, is doing. When you force both of those players into the same framework of accomplishing success, you're punishing hard work, you're punishing intelligent play, and I think that's a bad dynamic at the table. Are you still there? Are you stunned? Are you trying to...
You got me. I was just letting that sink in. I don't have anything to add.
I mean, I could state it more concisely if it needs to be stated more concisely. Games that have random penalties for failure are fine. If your GM is willing to allow players to engage directly with the world and avoid rolling the dice so that the dice don't blow up in their faces. If your GM treats intelligent players who engage with the world, who find out about characters, find out about NPCs, find out about NPCs' personality, find out about technology or magic in the world, and then use it in an intelligent fashion. If your GM puts that on the exact same level as just rolling the dice without thinking about it, you're punishing good role playing.
Yeah, of course. I think I see this on a smaller scale, just in combat. It's sort of a silly example, but I don't like critical hits, and I especially don't like critical fumbles. It's not quite the same, but it's that punishment feeling for playing the game the way you're supposed to play. It cuts out a lot of the fun when you get crit, anyway.
I wonder if you had a game masters who were properly raised, I would say, I don't know what the correct term is right now, to reward detailed engagement in the world. Okay, I ask about the king. Is he greedy? Yeah, he's greedy. Okay, I get 100 gold pieces, and I take it to his major domo and say, we notice that your castle needs some extra upkeep. Allow us to donate for whatever, and then will you let us? And then kind of casually mention, hey, we need to get fast. Okay, so you have a situation where there's a greedy official. You found out about it. You're engaging with him as if he's real. Okay, let's appeal to his greed. That's what you want. That's what you want to encourage. And if you appeal to his greed and you get the right answer, let's say the wrong answer is appeal to his gluttony. You bring him a big barrel of beer, and the king is a teetotaler. He doesn't drink alcohol. Okay, so you failed. You failed. You don't get to roll because you failed. If you bring him money, you succeed. You don't have to roll because you succeeded. If your game includes, and this is just a question I have, a wonder I have, if with the right DM who's willing to allow players to succeed or fail based on what they do, primarily on what they do, not just on the dice, and there's huge negatives to, balanced with huge positives to rolling the dice, I wonder if that will drive players to engage with the world more, or if it just makes players who do engage with the world frustrated more because of GMs who don't do things that way.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Does changing the incentives just ruin the experience, or does it get you the desired behavior? Well, you'll have to experiment on it.
I mean, I hadn't thought about it until right now. These negative incentives for rolling the dice drove me to not roll the dice ever, because I hate getting screwed by bad dice rolls. And so I'm wondering if that translates to other characters, or if that's just a peculiar reaction of mine, other players, or if that's just a peculiar reaction of mine. So I don't know. It's worth thinking about. That's just a wonder I have. I'm not coming down on an exact position with that. It's just something I wonder about. We've been having a huge a storm of a chat today. Jeffro's here. We want to welcome Jeffro and Bradford Walker, Adam, all the rest of everybody who showed up. Is there anything interesting in the chat that we should talk about?
Oh, they've just been following along the conversation, talking about players who drive you nuts with playing the game like a video game. Jeffro Johnson mentioned when we were talking about interacting with the world, he mentioned that there's a game master who set up a great module in a pyramid, a great big pyramid that has panels that came off as you delved deeper into the dungeon. He said that the guy who ran it lamented that he run the scenarios 20 times. No one had ever tried swinging from the chandeliers in the dungeon. Yeah, I mean, if all you want to do is just and see, this is part of the problem with the old school style grid or hex play, because often you're gonna get in that mode where you're like, I'm in the dungeon, these are my choices, and a fight breaks out, and all of a sudden you've got this menu of things to do, and you just like you stop thinking about the world as a game world, and you start thinking of it as this the tactical board game where you need to crush your opponents, that sort of thing. And especially in modern D&D, where it's set up like a video game, where the correct answer is usually to trade blows, because you the game is structured so that you will probably win, and if you take too many losses, you'll get a rest and recover some of your resources, that sort of thing. So that's one of the problem with that sort of grid, that tactical grid type game, because sometimes people get into that mindset, and it's hard to break them out and actually interact with the world as a world. That's a tough balance to strike.
The wonder I have is it possible to train game masters? Because what I sense with certain game masters is not that they're they hate doing things that way. It's that they don't know how, and it's so easy to do it the other way. Um, it is really truthfully easier to say, oh, if you want to climb this wall, make an athletics check. Climb. I'm referring to something that's in the chat right now. Make an athletics check, and if you do, you climb it. That's easy, and then you just extend that to everything in the game, right? Because that's how combat is. You extend it from combat into wall climbing, into hiding in shadows, and then you extend that into sweet talking NPCs. It's easy. Game masters can easily see how to run the game, but in order to, it's not satisfying to me. It's not satisfying to a lot of players, and there's a better way to run the game. And this can apply to any genre. I'm not specifically talking about D&D now. A better way to run the game is to say, okay, you're looking at this door. It's of X and such type wood. There's a carved scene on the front of it. What do? I rolled pick locks. That's one way to do it. Or you could say, wait a minute, is there a laurel leaf on this tree? And you ask that because you know that this particular dungeon used to be a temple of a god, and laurel leaves were holy to this god. And the game master says, yes, there is a set of laurel leaves that are pointing down. And the player goes, wait a minute. All of the statues we've seen so far, all of the, portraits we've seen so far, all of the tapestries we've seen so far, the laurel leaves have been pointed up. I look closer at the laurel leaves. Well, you notice that the wood around them is kind of scratched up. Okay, well, I try to turn that. Does it turn? I try to turn it upright, and the door opens. That is more rewarding. That is a more rewarding style of play than just I roll the dice. And my point is, and I'm actually getting back to the thought I had, is it possible to train dungeon masters or game masters into engaging in the world, in the reality, in the physical, tangible reality of the world with players? Is it possible to train them so that they're confident in doing that, they're comfortable with doing that, and so they get away from the default mode of play, the easy mode of play, which is you have some numbers, I have some numbers, roll dice, we'll see if you win.
Amen.
That's just a question I have. I don't like to think that there are just some DMs who are naturally better and you can't train anyone to get better. I really don't think that's the truth. I don't want to, absolutely do not say that that's the truth.
Well, I mean, they can. I did. I started off with Storytime D&D, and I couldn't run that game, and I learned, some standard, by now standard old school or OSR techniques, and that's the way I like to run the game. I don't even do the full original D&D strict timekeeping sort of dungeon crawl thing, but you can learn how to run a game the old way.
All right. Do we have any other questions we want to go over?
Oh, I don't have any. Chat's been busy, but nobody's been asking any specific questions.
Okay. We do have one final comment from Jeffro, which is Infocom's Zork, Wishbringer, and Enchanter games encapsulate how D&D was played at MIT in the 70s, and they can teach some of what I'm talking about here to game masters. So, food for thought. Okay, and I want to remind people that most of my last 20 minutes have been me asking questions, not me trying to present absolute answers. They're intended as food for thought with some of my reasoning behind it, not intended as to say, yes, this is absolutely how it is. There are other things I've said this is absolutely how it is in the show, but those were just questions. They were, or not questions, they're ruminations that I'm going to take on board and think about. And when I'm designing my own game, because this massive project I talked about at the beginning of the show does involve a role-playing game. It does involve a role-playing system. It involves a role-playing setting, and it involves fictional stories in that setting. So 3 aspects of it. I have done a lot of research on role-playing games, a lot of thinking about role-playing games to try and hone a system. And I guess my major goal is to drive player and DM interest in the game world as a world, so they engage with it as if it were a real place, in the sense that they think about the setting, the situations they're in, and they try to act in those situations, not taking into account primarily numbers, not taking into account die rolls, but taking into account what is the situation you are in, what are your characters going to do to get to get through this situation with the result you want. So description from the game master is key to that, but also players willing to engage with the world and not just with the dice is also key. And again, there isn't a whole lot game designers can do to force that on the table. There isn't a whole lot they can do to, much like the government, there isn't much they can do to make things right, but there's a whole hell of a lot they can do to ruin things. So game designers are very, very limited in what they can do to make things go right at the table, but they are, they are vested with almost infinite power to make them go very, very wrong. Not quite infinite power, but almost infinite power, because you can kit bash a game together, even a terrible game, and can kit bash together to make it work. So my goal when I'm designing not just the rules, but the philosophy of how those rules are used, how to apply them to a game, and this is an ongoing process. I'm still learning. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still trying to apply it. I'm still noodling my way through it. Is how do I, as a game designer, when I put the mechanics together, and then when I describe how the mechanics should work to players or GMs, what can I do to make sure that my mechanics get out of the way of engaging with the world as if it were real, and that I try to teach people how to do it, because it's much, much more interesting to do it my way. And I'm not saying it's my exclusively. Lots of people do it. You tell people, okay, you're at a border crossing. It's locked. There's a bunch of cars piled up. People are getting out. They're getting angry. And we'll just say zombies for the second. And you can see behind you, the horde of zombies you've been rushing away from are getting closer and closer. What do you do? Well, as a game master, you just quickly describe the situation. Your players should ask you, okay, what else is going on? What are the cars we have available here? Do we have weapons? Do other people have weapons? How many border guards are there? You give them details that are concrete, that describe the reality of the game world. And then, instead of saying, well, I want to bribe, I roll a charisma check, they say, I want to, talk to the guard, or whatever they want to do. Okay, that guy over there, he has a semi, right? Yes. This is just a wooden barrier. There's no actual barriers here. No, there's no fencing or whatever. Well, I'm not waiting for the zombies to get here. I'm going to go back to the truck. I'm going to get into the semi, and we're going to drive right through this barricade. And if the guards get on our way, we're going to run them the hell over. Okay, that's looking at the reality of the world, looking at the situation, and coming up with a solution. Intimidating the guards, try to, threaten them, may work, may not. Try to bribe them, may work, may not. try to pull rank on them. Maybe you have some sort of official rank. May work, may not. Doing this truck thing may work, may not. But if you encourage players and DMs to do it that way, to where dice rolls aren't the first, last, and only resort when they're playing, I believe in my heart of hearts, it makes the game world more real, it makes the characters more real, and it drives engagement with the game. And ideally speaking, even if you're playing in that Dark Souls style, in that Infinity Blade style, in that roguelike style, even if characters are expected to die as soon as they make a big mistake, driving the reality of the world, making the game world as vivid and concrete as you can, I think makes the game enjoyable, more enjoyable for everyone. And I think it makes players more interested in getting involved in doing things in the game. That's my theory, and I want to design things so that it supports that, it gets out of the way of that play, and I want to include, that every game has a chapter of usually useless GM device. I want to include GM advice, that tries to teach GMs how to do it this way so that they can get players who invest in their game and they can invest in the game and everybody enjoys it more. That's my goal.
I'd add to that when it comes to the story game archetypes. Going back to the character backstory thing, players are going to become engaged with the world and the game through their actions and interacting with the game, not as some shared writing exercise. They're not part of something bigger. They feel self-important because they wrote this neat story that everybody has to pay attention to. But you'll get everybody engaged in the game if they're interacting with the world through the game, through the other people at the table.
All right. Well, we're well out of time.
I believe we're coming rapidly upon an hour overtime. Pretty good.
I just want to thank everybody for showing up. We've had an absolute fantastic discussion in the chat that I haven't been able to read all of it because I've been talking occasionally. You may not have noticed. Any last words before we go?
Well, thanks everybody for listening. It's good to have everyone in chat talking about RPGs again.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done an RPG show, so I'm glad we got around to that. Not just got around to it in the sense of the larger sense of things, but actually got around to that in this episode because we were talking about other things early on.
It was a good show. Thanks for being an awesome co-host, D-Dub.
You too, Dornall. Thanks everybody who tuned in now and who are tuning in the future. This is Geek Gab. We're here about every week, about this same time. We're also available on youtube.com. We're available. Just do a search for Geek Gab. It's youtube.com/Geek Gab. That's it. That's us. Or you can do a search for Geek Gab on SoundCloud, the Google Play Store, and the iTunes Store. And you can subscribe to this podcast and listen to it on any device that you want. It is set up for your convenience. We, your hosts, are leaving for today. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.